The vast silence of space surrounded the lone human craft as it drifted without power between two dim stars. Inside, Daniel sat strapped to his chair, breathing heavily, his chest rising and falling as warning lights flickered all around him. He had been a survey pilot, a simple explorer sent to map asteroid fields, but something had gone wrong with his engine and his vessel had been left adrift. For hours he had watched the stars without hope, wondering if this was where his journey would end. Then the impossible happened. A massive shadow swallowed his view, and he felt the tremble of something docking with his ship. Daniel barely had time to register what was happening when the airlock opened, and light spilled. In figures stepped through, tall and strange, with fur-lined armor and tails flicking behind them. They were not like the pale reptilian traders he had once seen in the colonies, nor like the metallic drones that sometimes passed through human sectors. These were different, muscular, feline in shape, yet intelligent in posture. Their ears twitched at every sound, and their eyes glowed faintly in the dim light of the failing cockpit. Daniel raised his hands in surrender, his heart hammering in his chest, unsure if they came as rescuers or hunters. The leader among them spoke in a guttural language he could not understand, and one of the others replied quickly, pointing toward him. They moved with precise coordination, yet something in their movements was more animal than soldier, like a pack of predators circling prey. Daniel swallowed hard, trying to stay calm. Then his eyes caught hers. Among them stood a figure slightly smaller than the rest, though her presence was far sharper. Her fur was sleek and patterned like shadow against moonlight, her eyes golden and focused, her movements graceful and restless. She was clearly female, but more than that, she carried herself differently from the others, as though she were constantly restraining something within. Her name, though he did not yet know it, was Lyra, and the moment she looked at him, the air in the room changed. The soldiers spoke in low tones, deciding what to do with the human. Daniel felt the cold grip of fear press against his chest, but then one of them gestured for him to move. He opened his mouth and said the first words that came to him, words simple and desperate. "Please, I am not a threat." The reaction was instant and shocking. The feline soldiers stiffened. But it was Lyra who changed most of all. The moment Daniel's voice touched the air, her body jolted as though struck by lightning. Her ears flattened, her claws slid from their sheaths, her tail lashed wildly, and her breathing quickened. Her eyes locked on him, wide and feral, a mix of fear and something far more dangerous. For a heartbeat, Daniel thought she might leap across the narrow space and tear him apart, yet she did not move. She only stood trembling, caught between instincts she could not control and the discipline drilled into her. The others noticed, and one of them barked her name in warning, a sharp sound that made her flinch. She turned away, pressing her claws into the metal wall, trying to steady herself. But her body betrayed her, muscles tight, shoulders quivering, tail lashing uncontrollably. The leader snarled an order, and Lyra stumbled back, eyes still fixed on the human, as if every fiber of her being demanded she stay close. Daniel could only watch in confusion, not understanding what had just happened. They escorted him out of the ruined vessel and into their own ship, a towering construct of black steel and glowing veins of blue energy. The corridors smelled faintly of metal and fur, and the echoes of clawed feet followed him. Daniel walked quietly, aware that he was surrounded, yet his mind remained on the strange reaction of the cat-like soldier. Why had she looked at him that way, as if something inside her had broken free the moment he spoke? The alien crew avoided speaking to him directly, instead communicating through gestures or sharp words among themselves. He could sense their unease, as though his very presence disturbed the natural balance aboard their vessel. When his eyes strayed toward Lyra, he saw her walking apart from the others, her movements restless, shoulders tense, claws flexing against her palms. She kept glancing at him and then forcing herself to look away, as if fighting a battle no one else could see. They led into a chamber that looked like a holding room, not quite a cell, but not far from it either. The walls pulsed faintly with energy, and a barrier slid shut behind him. The aliens left him there, though he noticed that 2 guards remained posted outside. He sat on the narrow bench inside, resting his head in his hands, trying to calm his racing thoughts. He should have been terrified of capture, of what they might do to him, yet his mind was consumed with a single question. Why had that soldier reacted like that to his voice? Hours seemed to pass in silence, until finally the barrier slid open and she entered. Lyra stepped into the room, her golden eyes reflecting the dim glow, her tail curling tightly around her leg. She closed the barrier behind her with a trembling hand. Daniel rose slowly, wary but curious. She stared at him for a long time without speaking, her claws flexing, her breathing uneven. Then she said in halting words, her voice low and strained, "Your voice, it should not affect me, but it does. It commands something inside me I cannot control." Daniel frowned, unsure what she meant. "I didn't mean to. I was only speaking." Her ears twitched sharply, her body trembling again at the sound of his words. She pressed her claws into the wall, gouging the metal as she forced herself to resist whatever was pulling at her instincts. Her tail lashed once, violently, before she steadied it. "You do not understand," she whispered. "For my kind, your voice is not just sound. It is something more, something old. Something I was trained all my life to resist. And yet when you speak, I cannot fight it." Her eyes locked with his, burning with fear and desperation. "If you keep speaking, I do not know what I will do." The barrier slid open again, and another soldier shouted her name, breaking the tension. She spun away, claws retracting as she hurried out, leaving Daniel alone in the room with his thoughts racing. He sat back down, staring at the wall. He was a simple human, just an explorer. Yet somehow his voice had nearly broken the will of a trained alien soldier. Whatever the truth was, he had stepped into something far larger than he could imagine, and deep inside him, a new fear began to grow, not of the aliens who had captured him, but of what his very presence might awaken in them. The ship moved through endless darkness with a low hum vibrating through the walls, and Daniel sat quietly inside the chamber that served as his cell, though it was more comfortable than he expected and offered a bench of dim light and enough air to breathe. Yet his mind refused to settle because the image of the alien soldier remained fixed in his thoughts. Lyra. He did not know her name then, but he remembered her golden eyes widening when he spoke, her body trembling as though every muscle fought against itself. The way her claws had sunk into the wall, as if resisting an invisible command. He replayed it again and again, trying to understand. He had done nothing special. He had not shouted or threatened. He had only spoken a few words in desperation, and yet she had nearly lost control. What frightened him more was that she herself seemed afraid of it, afraid of what her instincts might demand if she allowed herself to give in. Outside his chamber, he heard the faint murmur of voices, the scrape of clawed feet on metal floors, the occasional bark of orders in their rough language. The crew seemed restless whenever they passed by his cell. He noticed how their eyes slid away from him, how they avoided standing too close, as though his very presence carried danger. Something in their culture or biology warned them about humans, though he could not imagine why. Humanity was small in the galactic sense, scattered colonies barely holding together after years of expansion and conflict. They had no empire, no great fleets, nothing to strike fear into powerful species like these. Yet still they treated him with unease. Hours passed until the barrier opened again. This time it was not Lyra, but another soldier who entered carrying a tray with food that looked unfamiliar but smelled faintly of roasted meat. Daniel accepted it with a nod, muttering, A quiet thank you. Without thinking, the sound of his voice made the soldier freeze for a split second, before he hurriedly set the tray down and left without saying a word. Daniel stared after him, unsettled. It was not just Lyra then. His voice carried some effect. Across her kind. Later the barrier opened once more, and there she was again. Lyra stepped inside with measured steps, her body tense, her claws sheathed, but her tail flicking with barely contained agitation. She stopped a few paces away from him and stared as if studying a dangerous weapon. "You must not speak," she said finally, her voice hoarse as though forced through clenched teeth. Daniel frowned. "Why? What happens when I do?" Her body jerked at the sound again, ears twitching, breath catching. She closed her eyes and gritted her fangs. "This is why. When you speak, my instincts awaken. I was taught all my life to control them, to bury them deep, but your voice cuts through every barrier. It commands me without meaning to. It demands my claws, my loyalty, my submission." Daniel felt a chill spread through him. "But I don't want to control you. I don't want to hurt you or your crew." Her eyes opened and locked on him with a desperate fire. "It does not matter what you want. It is what you are. Do you understand? My people were shaped long ago by forces we do not fully speak of. We were made to answer certain tones, certain rhythms. No one has ever produced them, no one until you." He shook his head in disbelief. "I am just a man, an explorer. Nothing special." "You are human," she hissed, her tail striking the floor. "That is enough." The way she said the word human made Daniel realize that his species carried a history in this galaxy he had never been told. A history buried or forgotten, but still powerful enough to ripple through bloodlines of creatures he did not know existed. He leaned back slowly, trying not to provoke her further. Before he could ask more, alarms suddenly blared through the ship. The walls pulsed red, and a deep siren echoed down the corridor. Lyra spun toward the door, her ears flicking sharply. She cursed under her breath in her language, then turned back to him. "Stay here," she snapped, but the command wavered when she met his eyes. For a heartbeat she looked torn, instincts pulling her one way and duty pulling her another. She pressed her claws against the wall again, steadying herself. "Do not speak again until I return." She left quickly, the barrier sliding shut, leaving him alone with the wailing alarms. Daniel's heart pounded. Something was happening outside, an attack or a collision, he could not tell. He paced the room, wondering if he would be abandoned, wondering if he would survive whatever was coming. He had never felt more helpless, yet beneath that fear something else gnawed at him, the question of what made his voice so dangerous to her people. Minutes dragged on like hours until the barrier opened once more. Lyra stood there, breathing hard, armor scorched with marks of recent combat. She stepped inside, and her claws dripped faintly with blood not her own. "They are boarding us," she said with sharp urgency. "The enemy comes for you." "For me?" Daniel asked in disbelief. "How could they even know I exist?" Her golden eyes darkened. "Because humans were never meant to vanish. There are whispers among the stars, old warnings that your kind carried a bond with ours. Our enemies know what you are. They want to claim you or kill you before your voice spreads." Daniel's head swam. It was too much to accept. He was just a lone explorer, nothing more, yet here these alien soldiers fought and died around him, for reasons tied to a past he did not know. Lyra stepped closer, trembling slightly as though the nearness of his presence strained her control. "I should leave you here, that is my order, but my instincts, they will not allow it." Her claws slid free again as she bared her teeth in frustration. "When you speak my name, I will obey you, even against my will. Do you understand the danger of that?" One word from you and I would fight until I am broken." Daniel stared at her, the truth sinking in like cold water. She was not exaggerating. Her entire being bent when she heard his voice. The thought terrified him because it meant his presence could destroy her free will. But the thought also carried another weight. If enemies truly hunted him, then her instincts might be the only reason he stayed alive. The ship rocked violently as explosions echoed through the hull. The sound of combat grew closer, shouts in alien tongues and the thunder of weapons. Lyra pressed closer to him, her tail lashing, her ears twitching to track every sound. "They are here," she whispered. "I cannot fight this. I cannot fight what your voice does to me. If you want to live, you must decide now whether you will command me or not." Daniel's throat tightened as he tried to answer, but in that moment, the door blew open with a burst of fire and enemy soldiers stormed inside. Lyra's body jolted at their arrival, claws unsheathing, golden eyes blazing, her muscles pulled. Between rage and instinct, she looked once at Daniel as if waiting for his words, her entire being trembling at the edge of control. And Daniel realized with horror that the next sound from his lips might unleash something he could never take back. The door burst open with a roar of metal tearing apart and smoke filled the chamber as figures stormed through with weapons, raised their armor darker and sharper than the soldiers who had captured Daniel, and their eyes glowed with cruel intent. They did not look at him with curiosity or caution as the crew had, but with hunger and certainty, as if he were already theirs to claim. Daniel staggered back against the wall, his heart thundering inside his chest, while the world blurred in fire and shouts around him. Lyra moved instantly before the enemies could aim. She was in motion, her body flowing like shadow and striker. Claws tore into the first intruder and sent him crashing to the floor with blood spraying the others. Fired, but she moved faster than their eyes could follow, leaping from wall to ceiling and tearing through them with feral precision. Yet even as she fought, Daniel saw the tremble in her muscles and the wild flicker in her golden eyes. It was not only training that drove her, but something deeper, rawer. One of the intruders raised his weapon toward Daniel, and time seemed to slow. He felt the icy grip of death close around him, but in desperation, he shouted without thinking, "Lyra!" His voice cut through the chaos, like a blade through air, and what happened next froze every thought in his mind. Her body jerked as if lightning had filled her veins, her claws extended fully, her ears flattened, and her tail lashed violently as she turned with impossible speed and struck the attacker down before his weapon could fire. Then she kept going, each motion sharper, faster, deadlier, her instincts unlocked beyond all reason. The enemies who had poured into the room fell before her like prey caught in the jaws of a predator. She ripped weapons from their hands and crushed them. She struck with hands and feet and tail until the floor was slick and the air filled with smoke and cries. Daniel stared in shock. She was no longer the soldier holding herself back with discipline. She was something else entirely, a force of nature driven by a power inside her that answered to his voice. The last enemy tried to crawl back toward the door, but Lyra pounced her claws, pinning him down. She looked back at Daniel, and for one terrifying moment he thought she might turn her fury on him. But then her breathing slowed and her eyes softened, though her claws trembled against the soldier's throat. She spoke in her rough voice between ragged breaths. "This is what I feared. This is what you can do to me." Daniel swallowed hard, unable to answer. He had only spoken her name, but it had unleashed a side of her no training could suppress. She released the enemy with a violent slash and rose to her feet, her body quivering with adrenaline, her fur matted with blood not her own. The alarm still blared, and the ship rocked again, as if more battles raged through the corridors. Lyra grabbed Daniel's arm and pulled him close, her claws digging lightly into his sleeve. "We cannot stay here. They will keep coming for you. They know what you are." As she dragged him down the corridor, Daniel's mind raced. "You keep saying what I am as if I'm something more than human. What does that mean? Why are they after me?" She looked back at him for only a second, her golden eyes filled with something like fear and awe. Because humans were never supposed to vanish. Long ago my people were made to serve another. We were shaped not only by nature, but by hands that twisted us. And the sound of your voice proves the old whispers true. Humans were the masters. Daniel felt the weight of her words crash over him. Masters. The idea felt absurd. Humanity was fragile, scattered, nothing like the empires he imagined among the stars. That's impossible. We're explorers, not rulers. Her tail lashed as she pulled him into another chamber where flickering screens showed the battle outside. Ships clashed in dark space, beams of fire cutting through the void. You may not believe, but our enemies believe. They would not risk their fleets otherwise. To them you are not one lost explorer, you are the return of something that should have stayed buried. Daniel stared at the images, then back at her, the truth gnawing at him. He had felt powerless since his ship failed, yet now he carried a power. He did not understand, one that could bend warriors to his voice. Another explosion shook. The vessel and the screen cracked with static. Lyra pressed her claws against the console, snarling. We cannot hold them for long. My crew does not trust me anymore. They saw what you did to me. They saw me lose control. Some fear you more than the enemy. Daniel felt guilt knot in his chest. He had not asked for this. He did not want to enslave her will or frighten her people. Yet if his voice could help them survive, how could he refuse to use it? I don't want to control you. I want to help you fight. But I don't even know how. Lyra's breath shook as she met his eyes. It is not a choice for me. When you speak my name, I cannot resist. That is the truth of my blood. She stepped closer, lowering her voice almost to a whisper. But understand this, Daniel. If you use that power, you take away who I am. Her words struck him harder than the explosions outside. She was right. To rely on her instincts was to strip her freedom. Yet the enemy pressed closer with every moment, and the ship would not survive without her strength. Suddenly the chamber door burst open again, and 3 more intruders stormed inside. Lyra leapt forward, but this time Daniel shouted, "Stop!" without thinking, and she froze mid-motion. Her claws inches from the first soldier's throat, her entire body locked in place. Shaking violently as her instincts tore at her, Daniel gasped, realizing what he had done. His voice had halted her completely against her will. The intruders turned their weapons on him, but Lyra screamed a feral sound, breaking free of the command through sheer force of will, and launched at them with renewed fury. The fight was brutal and swift, ending with the soldiers sprawled lifeless on the floor. When it was over, Lyra stood over them, panting, her chest heaving, her claws dripping. She turned to Daniel with fire in her eyes. Do not ever use your voice like that again. If you take my will from me, I am no longer alive. I am only your shadow. Daniel felt the weight of shame press down. He had not meant to command her, but instinct had made him do it. Now he saw clearly how dangerous his presence was. He could protect her but also destroy the very core of who she was. The ship trembled again under heavy fire. Lyra steadied herself and grabbed his arm once more. Come, there's no more time for doubt. The enemy wants you because they know what you can do. But so do I, and if I must choose between my instincts and your death, I will choose to fight at your side, not because you command it, but because in this moment I cannot bear the thought of you falling to them. Her words hung heavy in the smoke-filled air as she pulled him deeper into the heart of the ship where the crew prepared for their final stand. And Daniel realized that what had begun as a rescue had become something much greater. He was no longer a lost explorer waiting for death in the void. He was a human whose very existence had the power to shake the balance of the galaxy. And whether he wanted it or not, his voice was now a weapon that could change everything. The ship groaned under the strain of battle, as if every bolt and panel begged for relief from the punishment it endured, and the corridors trembled with the sound of weapons striking the hull from outside. Daniel followed Lyra through twisting passages dimly lit by emergency lights, his heart pounding with every step as the voices of the crew shouted orders and warnings in their harsh tongue. Some glanced at him as he passed, their eyes wary and their ears flat, and he understood without words that they did not see him as a guest or even a prisoner anymore. They saw him as something dangerous, a storm hidden in the body of a man whose voice could unravel their strongest warriors. Lyra walked ahead of him with her shoulders squared and her claws flexing against her palms, her golden eyes sharp with determination, though he could see the twitch in her tail that betrayed her inner struggle. Every time he spoke to her, she reacted, even to the smallest sound, and it cut through her discipline like fire through dry wood. Yet she never turned away from him. She carried him through the chaos with a resolve that felt almost painful to watch, because Daniel knew she was sacrificing herself each time. She fought her instincts to stay free. They reached the central chamber where the captain and officers of the vessel gathered before a wide projection of the battle outside. Dozens of enemy ships formed a ring around them, pouring fire into their shields, while allied vessels tried to hold the line. The captain turned with eyes like burning coals and spoke sharply to Lyra in their language. Daniel could not understand, but he recognized the tone of accusation. The officer's hand pointed at him again and again until the entire chamber's gaze rested on him with heavy suspicion. Lyra answered quickly, her voice low but firm, her claws sliding against the metal floor as if daring them to challenge her. The crew murmured among themselves, some snarling in agreement with the captain, others looking uncertain. Daniel felt the tension thicken around him like a noose. They were debating whether he was worth keeping alive. Perhaps they believed that his presence was drawing the enemy closer, or perhaps they feared that, if his voice spread through the ship, more soldiers would lose their will. Daniel opened his mouth to speak, desperate to defend himself, but Lyra spun on him and hissed with her ears flat. "Do not speak here," she whispered in human tongue, her voice trembling. "If they hear you, it will spread. Already they fear what you are." One word might bind them without choice. He closed his mouth quickly, but his thoughts raged. He had never asked for this. He had never wanted to carry a weapon hidden in his throat. Yet everywhere he turned, the truth followed him. His kind was not as forgotten as he believed. Even the enemies who surrounded them seemed to know. The battle was not for the ship. It was for him. The captain barked one last command and the chamber shook again as another blast rocked the hull. Lyra grabbed Daniel's arm and pulled him away, ignoring the stares that followed them. When they were alone in a narrow passage, she pressed him against the wall, her claws braced on either side of his shoulders. Her breathing was ragged and her eyes burned with a mix of fury and desperation. "They will not hold for long," she said. "The enemy will break through and take you. And I do not know if I can stop them without losing myself." Daniel shook his head, feeling helpless. "I don't want you to lose yourself. I don't want anyone to. I only want to survive." Her claws trembled as they scraped the wall near his face. "You do not understand. Survival for you may mean chains for me. Every time you speak my name, I feel I will slip away. It is as if something inside me waits only for your command. My training, my honor, my choices vanish. Do you know what it means for my people to lose choice? It means we are not alive. We are tools." Her voice cracked, and for the first time Daniel saw not the fierce soldier, but the woman beneath, torn apart by fear of herself. His chest ached with guilt. He wished he could silence whatever bond had formed, wished he could cut away the power. His voice carried, but he could not. Before he could answer, the ship shuddered violently and alarms screamed louder than ever. A voice over the intercom announced in their language that the shields were failing. Lyra snarled and pulled him toward another corridor, but they did not make it far before the ceiling above them cracked open with sparks and a new wave of intruders dropped down. Their armor was marked with crimson symbols, and their weapons glowed. With searing energy, Daniel stumbled back as they raised their weapons. Lyra leapt forward, but the odds were too high. She fought like lightning, yet for every enemy she struck, two more pressed closer. Daniel's chest clenched with fear as one of them turned its gun toward him. He could not stay silent. His survival demanded action. Without thinking, he shouted again, calling her name. The effect was immediate and overwhelming. Lyra's body surged with power as if chains had snapped inside her. She howled with a feral cry and tore through the enemy line with speed and strength, far beyond before. Her claws flashed like blades, her tail whipped with force, and her strikes shattered armor. The intruders fell one after another, crushed in her frenzy. The survivors fled back through the broken ceiling, scrambling to escape the storm they had unleashed. When the last one vanished, Lyra stood panting, her fur streaked with blood, her golden eyes glowing with wild intensity. She turned to Daniel slowly, her chest heaving. For a moment he feared she was gone, consumed by instinct. But she spoke, her voice rough. "Do you see now? This is why they fear you. This is why they will not stop hunting you. You are their nightmare reborn." Daniel felt the weight of her words crush him. He had unleashed her again, and though it saved them, he saw the torment in her eyes. She hated what she became under his voice, yet she could not resist. The intercom blared again, announcing the enemy fleet had doubled its firepower. The ship could not hold much longer. Lyra wiped her claws against the wall and stepped closer to him. She whispered with a trembling voice filled with both defiance and surrender. "Command me, Daniel. If you want to live, command me now. My instincts demand it. I will obey until nothing remains." His throat tightened as he looked at her. Around them the walls shook and the world burned, but inside him a heavier battle raged. To use her as a weapon would save them, but strip her freedom. To refuse might doom them both. He wanted to believe there was another way, a path where her choice mattered, where his voice was not a chain but something else. And yet, even as he hesitated, her knees bent and her claws dug into the floor, her head lowered before him, her tail flicking wildly as instincts overpowered discipline. She whispered again, so softly it chilled him more than a scream. "Command me, and I will obey." And in that moment, Daniel understood the truth. The battle outside was not the only war being fought. The greater war was inside this soldier's heart, a war between her instincts and her will. And his next word would decide not only the fate of the ship, but the fate of who she truly was. The enemy ships closed around them like a tightening noose, their massive frames blotting out the scattered stars. Beyond the viewports, the crew on board the vessel felt their hope draining, as one by one they realized there was no path for escape, and no chance to win against so many opponents. Daniel stood near the center of the command chamber, his hands trembling, though he tried to hide it. From the others, his voice had brought strange power into this place, and now it seemed the weight of that power might destroy them all. Lyra was crouched low, her ears pinned back, and her claws ready, her eyes locked on him as if awaiting a signal, and the strange pull inside her was stronger than ever before. She whispered through clenched teeth, "That single plea, command me, and I will obey." But Daniel could not bring himself to be the tyrant that instinct seemed to demand inside. His chest, his heart pounded, and he thought of what it meant to give an order that would strip someone of choice. He did not want control, he wanted freedom and trust, and he wanted them to fight, not because he told them to, but because they believed in it themselves. Enemy hailed the ship again, their commander's voice sharp and arrogant as he demanded that the human be surrendered for capture. He promised mercy if they obeyed, but his tone carried the lie of slaughter, and Daniel felt every eye on him waiting for what he would do. He could see the fear in the crew, and the strain in Lyra. She was breaking inside, torn between her own will and the ancient programming in her blood. Daniel felt that weight pressing on him, and he closed his eyes for a breath. Then he raised his head and spoke. not in a voice of command, but in one of conviction. His words rolled through the chamber like a steady flame. He said they would not surrender. They would not kneel, because to do so meant the death of everything they valued. He spoke of survival. He spoke of the bond between them, of the strange twist of fate that had brought human and alien together. And he said that power did not belong to him alone. It belonged to all of them, if they stood as one. The moment he spoke, the air changed. Lyra felt her instincts surge, but this time the pull was not chains on her will, it was fire in her heart. She rose to her feet, claws gleaming, and declared that she would fight, not because her instincts demanded it, but because she chose it. Her cry echoed through the chamber, and the crew found themselves stirred awake by Daniel's words and by her courage. They were no longer afraid. Their fear turned to resolve. The enemy saw the sudden change and moved to strike. Their cannons lit the darkness, but the ship lurched to life and the crew fought like they had never fought before. Lyra was a storm on the battlefield. When the boarding pods smashed against the hull, she tore through the invaders with fury, her body moving with lethal speed, every slash and strike powered by something deeper than instinct. It was choice and devotion. Daniel's voice guided them, but not as command, rather as a beacon. The crew rallied together. Systems that had been left unmanned suddenly sparked with energy. Pilots threw the ship into desperate maneuvers. Engineers diverted power to weapons. Gunners unleashed everything they had. The enemy was not expecting such a stand from what they thought was prey, and for the first time they faltered. Daniel could feel the rhythm of the fight. He shouted warnings and encouragement, his voice carrying not control but courage every time he spoke. Lyra grew stronger and steadier. She fought like a shield around him. No enemy could break through her defense, and her strikes carried the strength of someone who was not bound, but liberated. The battle stretched long into the void. The enemy numbers should have crushed them, yet unity held the crew together. Each strike against them answered with greater fury. Daniel felt his throat raw from speaking, yet he did not stop, because every word kept them alive and kept Lyra balanced between the edge of instinct and the power of free will. Finally, with one last coordinated assault, the crew managed to tear apart the flagship of the enemy fleet. Its destruction sent shockwaves through the ranks, and the rest of the attackers fled into the shadows of space. The silence after the last explosion was heavy and unreal, and then the chamber erupted in cries of victory. Daniel stood still, his chest heaving as he looked at the crew, their faces smeared with exhaustion and triumph. He turned to Lyra. She was standing tall, her body streaked with blood and bruises, but her eyes were calm. For the first time since their meeting, she knelt before him, not as a slave but as an equal, and she whispered, "I chose this, not instinct, not control, choice." Daniel reached down and lifted her to her feet, his voice low but steady. He told her she was free and always would be. She smiled faintly, and the crew gathered around them, longer bound by fear of his voice, but inspired by it in that moment. It was clear the galaxy would soon learn that humans had returned. Their voice carried weight beyond what anyone could imagine, yet it was not dominance that would define them. It was the ability to awaken choice in others. Daniel looked out into the stars, knowing this was only the beginning, and with Lyra at his side and the crew standing strong, he felt that whatever came next, they would face it not as master and servant, but as allies bound by something stronger than instinct or fear. They were bound by will, and by the certainty that humanity was no myth, but a spark that could set the galaxy aflame. The end.